Hello everyone! For this video, I'm going to outline the basics of color theory for Art 1 students. Let's get started. So here we have the color wheel. This might be a review from your elementary art days, but it's important to know for some of these principles of color theory. So here we have the primary colors, which are red, yellow, and blue, and we have secondary colors, which are orange, green, and violet. You might remember that the secondary colors are made when you mix primary colors together, so red and yellow make orange. Yellow and blue make green, and blue and red make violet. Now these colors in between our secondaries and our primaries are called tertiaries, and these are made when we mix a primary and a secondary together. So yellow and orange makes yellow-orange. Notice that we always put the name of the primary color before the name of the secondary. Complementary colors are across from each other on the color wheel. So red and green are complementary, yellow, green, and red, violet are complementary, orange and blue are complementary. When you mix complementary colors in equal amounts, you'll get a neutral color. So if you have the same amount of orange mixed with the same amount of blue, you should get this neutral grayish brownish color. When you mix more of one complementary color to a little bit of another complementary color, you get an effect called reducing saturation, and that's something we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. Analogous colors are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. Warm and cool colors are what happen when we split this color wheel in half, and on this side we have warm colors, and on this side we have cool colors. And these are all important things to remember whenever we talk about some of the next few principles. So here are just a few examples of some of these in some famous works of art that you might recognize. We've got Mondrian's color blocks here. Notice that he only uses primary colors. We've got Monet's water lilies. He uses a lot of analogous colors, so blue and green and yellow, those are all next to each other on the color wheel. And here we have a good example of warm colors versus cool colors. And these are all just the same basic principles that I just explained to you in famous works of art. So we just discussed hue, and that is just the colors of the rainbow. The colors on the color wheel, that Roy G. Biv that you learned in elementary school. You might recall from drawing class that value is what we use to kind of define shapes in space. So we add value when we want something to be darker, like a shadow or a cast shadow, and we remove it whenever we need to show a light source, a point of emphasis. Now, saturation is something very important to color theory because it's really important with atmospheric perspective. You might remember that linear perspective is when we use lines to show three-dimensionality in an object. Like you might draw one of those boxes that has lines going into a vanishing point. That's linear perspective. Atmospheric perspective is when we use the way our eyes perceive color and light to show distance. Now, you can see this red color right here is very highly saturated. It's very, very intense. Whereas down here, it's almost completely gray. Now, it's all the same hue. It's all the same color of red, but we've changed it to where it's not as highly saturated. It's not as intense. Now, how do we do that? In painting, you might mix a complement. Now, when you mix red and green, it will take some of the saturation out of the red, but it might also change the temperature, so it might make it cooler as well. And it's difficult to explain in a video and something you just have to practice and see for yourself, but it's all a very delicate balance of achieving the right hue and saturation and temperature. So here's a good example of what I was just talking about, saturation. And as you can see, these colors in the front of this photograph are very highly saturated. It's this, pretty bright green. And here it gets a little bit less saturated, a little bit more so, until we get all the way to the back of these mountains, which are just the very, very slightest indication of this very intense color. And a good way to remember this is that high saturation brings something forward in space, where low saturation will move it backward, and we get this illusion of distance within our composition. You might also notice that these colors are very warm up here. So it's the same way with warm and cool colors. Warmth will bring an object forward in your composition, where cool colors will push it back into the background. So you can tell that this is very blue. We know these are trees and that they're green, but our eyes perceive them as very blue because they're very far away. So in essence, that is color theory. Hopefully you can practice with this on your own, and it'll take a lot of practice to get right, because when you change the saturation of a color or the temperature of a color by adding other colors into it, it will affect your hue, it will affect your value, and it is difficult to achieve, but you'll get to see some really amazing things happen within your artwork. So keep practicing, and if you have questions, reach out to me, and hopefully you have a good understanding of color theory now. Thank you.